Or she could play hard to get. No. So yeah, we were just talking about why we're coming up here to speak with you, and I think the two parts of where we connected. So it's not just I called you. I don't know how long ago now. Would it have been last summer?
Yeah, quite some time. Yeah.
And it was mainly about Soul Survivor and the people I was speaking with. You'd spoken in synod about Soul Survivor specifically, where there hadn't really been much of a mention of it. Everyone had been incredibly quiet about it too. And we were just talking about, okay, what's the story here that we can tell? Now, I'm motivated to speak with you for two reasons. The first one is, as you said on the phone the other day, people from Soul Survivor are slightly maybe bodged up.
Yeah.
So I can see that in myself.
Yeah.
How's it impacted me? So that's the first thing. That's kind of instigating this chat. But then the second thing is through me trying to figure out what the story was and the people that were affected, the stories of abuse in Soul Survivor are really sad. Mistreatment, perhaps more so, but also abuse. And then as I've understood it and spoken to more people, that just making these videos and people sending me emails, it's heartbreaking to hear the amount of actual abuse that's occurred. Now, as I looked at it, and at the beginning, it was like Mike Pilavacci is the scapegoat here. Throw him under the bus. He was an idiot, had a bunch of maybe desires that he didn't fulfill.
Yeah.
And the way that he could was with guys that look very similar.
Yeah.
Really quite obvious.
Yeah.
But then as I began to understand it, it was understanding the fact that he was made a vicar without the process. He was given an MBE because of the impact he had among young people. And then the fallout of that is a heck of a lot of people are quite hurt, one. And then two, the way church was executed through Soul Survivor is being replicated through a lot of the Church of England. In addition to that, some really senior figures were aware of his misbehaviour and they kept it hidden. And then I began speaking with people that were connected to Smythe, and the Archbishop was aware of it in 2013, kept it hidden, and maybe before then, this is what I've read since. Fletcher, which I've been told I shouldn't really talk about because it's a criminal case, not dissimilar. And then the current Archbishop stand-in, he's hidden a bunch of things that's coming out right now too, where victims were paid off. He paid off with tithe money. And the aspect which I wanted to talk about straight away was you spoke in synod, and you've spoken before maybe about Welby to resign, but you started that petition, which was certainly incredibly close to him resigning. It seemed very connected to me. Why was it that you felt he needed to resign, that you vocalised, and then what was the point of doing a petition? Why did you need to do something that was public? Just as, he resigned on Channel 4 or whatever, he spoke about it. It wasn't done in church, it was done outside of church. There's this real confused way of communicating that criticises social media and videos like this when they're not on tone.
Yep.
And then there's a use of it to try and get the institutional message across. There's this whole mismatch. And
There's lots of issues there.
Yeah, totally. And you represent that really well. You're both on synod, right? Yeah. And you're, celeb tweeter.
Hardly. Maybe, I'll start with why I called for Justin's resignation.
Yeah.
I called for Justin's resignation from last February when we discussed the J report at Synod. So it wasn't simply to do with Macon, and it wasn't just Justin. At February Synod, I called for both Justin and William Nye, who's the Secretary General of the Church of England, to resign. And I compared it to my big experience of trauma, which was the Grenfell Tower Fire, when I was a local councillor and a vicar in North Kensington. And it was very obvious after the fire that neither the leader of the council nor the chief executive of the council could stay in place with that many deaths. And I compared our history of abuse to Grenfell. Now, some people might see that as outlandish, but it does feel to me that over a long period of time, there may well not be as many deaths as Grenfell.
Just to interrupt you, what happened to those council sort of leaders?
They had to go. So, I mean, essentially what happened in Kensington and Chelsea was that the Conservative group, which was in charge, essentially forced the leader of the council, the deputy leader of the council, and the chief executive to resign. And then the Conservative group within council for the next local elections did a complete complete changeover of who their councillors were. So you have change that's happening really, really quite quickly, and people taking responsibility, and the institution, in that terms, the Conservative Party in Kensington Chelsea taking responsibility.
Right.
So I compared Grenfell and us and the Church of England safeguarding history because I do think there's as many deaths. And I compared it in a really passionate way. And at the end of that speech, I called for Justin and William's resignations.
William
Nye.
Okay.
William Nye's resignation. So William Nye is the Secretary General of the Church of England.
What's that function?
So William is the essentially the Chief Executive of the Church of England. He is the person who runs Church House and all of the institutions which come with church. And he is appointed by the Archbishop's Council, and he has a lot of power. He's not answerable to synod, for example, and sets the tone and the culture.
So
for things like comms and the legal department,
and optics.
All of these, all the optics.
Yeah.
These things which are really important for victims and survivors and for our safeguarding culture in general. So I called for their resignations from Jay. When Macon was published, when the Macon report into Smiles abuse was published, I thought, well, not only is this about Justin Welby and William Nye taking institutional responsibility, but it's actually, in relation to Justin, about Justin taking some personal responsibility for the ways in which he was involved within a particular part of Church of England culture which seemed to be covering up Smythe's abuse, and of which, to a great degree, he would have been aware. That is not to say that I wanted him to be scapegoated, or that those who then joined me in calling for his resignation, are a lynch mob. It is simply that actually, in order to take proper responsibility, something needs to happen.
Yeah.
After Jay, I called for resignations because in order for change to happen, you actually need people at the top to show leadership, to take responsibility, to open up a space in which change is able to happen, in which new people can come in. And those new people, when they come in, because of the resignations having happened, know that there is a cost to getting things wrong, and know that something has to happen when you get things wrong. At the moment, we live in a culture in which essentially bishops apologise continually. They say we're going to learn lessons continually. They do make some changes within the culture, within their own diocese, but they do not take responsibility for when we, as a church, get things wrong. And that seems to me to be really problematic.
So, a few things pop up. You say that, I mean, in some respects, he resigned because he wasn't a leader, maybe. I mean, a leader's responsibility to hearing news like that would be to say, this is inappropriate, wrong, and not Christ-like at all. Mm-hmm. This needs to be dealt with. So, my reading of it would be, did he step down because he recognised that he wasn't a leader? And so the challenge goes along a line which suggests you're not fit for leadership. It's not you blew it. It's not you made a mistake, but it's you're not fit for leadership. Is that, rather than a penalty, in some respects it's a judgment on his ability.
His ability.
Or even his calling. if we're being theological about it.
So, I mean, it's not that when I was calling for Justin's resignation, that wasn't about me making judgments about him as a leader in relation to the breadth of things that he does within the church, or in relation to his pastoral responsibilities as an archbishop. I think there are lots of good things that have happened under Justin's time, but
Jordan, how many fingers do you need?
but if something is really significant like this in the church's life, it does take people to take responsibility. In the end, I don't think my voice, or even the voice of the two people who joined me as co-signatories of the petition, were that significant until the Bishop of Newcastle, Helen Ann Hartley, also called for Justin's resignation. And I think that's really significant, because once you have one bishop speak out and say that the Archbishop of Canterbury should resign on this as well, then that is indicative that within the College of Bishops and within the House of Bishops, there are others who presumably think like her, but are not prepared to say it publicly. So at that point, I think it became clear to Justin that he had lost the moral authority and respect of the College and House of Bishops. And so his position, I think, was really untenable.
I don't want to be that middle-aged white guy who says, why is it a woman bishop that was the one that spoke out? And she was incredibly isolated.
Yeah.
For a fair amount of time. What was it about her that meant that she... Why did she put her head above the...
So I know that some people have been talking in terms of gender, and that it's a woman bishop. I'm not really sure that gender
doesn't matter.
The most significant factor here. I think there are lots of survivors and victims of abuse who will have had very similar experience under bishops who happen to be women as those who have under the men. I think in relation to Helen Ann, I think there are other significant factors, and there are significant factors, I think, for all of us as individuals in how we respond to safeguarding culture and victims within the church. One of those is, and we don't know this about anybody else, what's our own history of abuse, our own history of sexuality, our own history of the ways in which we have been treated or bullied by others in power. So, and I can't speak for Helen Ann on that, but I would say that that's a significant factor in how any of us respond. The other factor is that obviously Helen Ann had spent a considerable amount of her episcopal ministry in New Zealand, so she was made a bishop in New Zealand.
Right.
The New Zealand church is a small church. Mm-hmm. It operates in a very different way. There is a completely different episcopal culture because bishops relate much more to their diocese and their individual clergy in more proximal ways than in the Church of England. I think there's a less corporate sense of bishops as hierarchical and leaders, and a more collegial sense.
Do they have a general secretary?
Do they have a secretary general? I don't. They probably do, but I don't know. I don't know who that is. So I think what you've got is somebody who's been made a bishop in a small church, with a small number of other bishops, in which there's a very different culture. So the English church, it seems to me, has and increasingly, I think, under Justin's time, has developed a very corporate view of episcopacy. Bishops as leaders rather than primarily as pastors of both their clergy and their people. Bishops as responsible for the institutional brand of the church. Bishops as those who are going to toe the line in relation to the culture that is set by Lambeth Palace, by Bishopsthorpe, which is where the Archbishop of York has his office, and by Church House. So I think that's a very, very different conception of church and episcopacy, what it is to be a bishop. So maybe gender did play an aspect. I suppose the ways in which gender might play aspects is that the statistics show that almost 1 in 2 women will have had some unwanted sexual sexual advance at some point.
Yeah.
And
which they weren't asking for at all.
That's not the same for men.
Yeah.
So I think that, yes, but I don't think that we need to isolate gender as the one particular thing.
Yeah, no, fair. So at the moment, we're at a stage where...
It's okay.
yeah, you're wearing... God, that's impressive.
I'm wearing the dog.
Yeah, you are. I mean, from the way you just described New Zealand's church sounded fantastic. And I mean, the increase in bishops over the last few years is just increased and increased and increased. It's as if church, and even the way that you spoke about, the Secretary General, sort of, I remember filming at Barclays HQ in Docklands. Mm-hmm. And I went to the top floor, which I was told by the chairman there, do you know, you're the first chap that's been here that didn't need to wear a tie. And I said, well, there's a, thing to put a pin in. But the culture you're talking about reminds me more of a multinational bank than it does of a church that I wanted to work in when I was in my 20s.
Fair.
The leader of the Church of England and the Anglican Communion resigned. Whether more needed to happen is another question, actually, from my perspective. So what's the future of this thing? Why does now matter more than before? Why are we having this conversation? Why does it actually why does it matter? What's the big deal? Like you likened it to the council. I mean, councils are really flipping dull from my perspective. Yep. Again, it's not a missional community where the idea of the kingdom of God gets close to our world. You likened it to the council, which feels very accurate, actually.
Yeah.
So
it's very clear from victims and survivors, and I think for many of us as well, that Stephen Cottrell really needs to resign as well, because there is such a lack of trust in how he has responded personally. Then I think, fourthly, Joanne Grenfell, who is the lead bishop for safeguarding, needs to resign. Victims and survivors who I've talked to complain bitterly that she is seen by them to be an absentee bishop, somebody who doesn't reply to emails, somebody who really doesn't see them as much as she should. And I think, being generous to Joanne, I think she's a young bishop, and she has probably toed the line which has been set by both Justin Welby and William Nye, and she probably doesn't cause or ask too many questions or be curious enough within church, within that culture. But it's fairly clear that she's not robust enough in the terms of what victims and survivors
standing up for people.
And then those are the people that I think need to go to show a willingness to change. But then we need people who are willing to actually make the reforms that are necessary. The reforms that I think are necessary are that we need to implement J completely, so that the J report completely. So we need to implement not just an independent body for scrutiny of our safeguarding. We do actually need to make safeguarding completely independent in both operation and in scrutiny. Now, one of the criticisms that is brought against that position is that means that we are no longer responsible for safeguarding within our own communities. But that just seems to me to be absolute nonsense. It is that we are all still responsible for safeguarding. Yeah. It's just that if an incident happens, then you approach an independent body to make the complaint.
Which is pretty normal for any other institution.
Absolutely.
So the two aspects which we need to just quickly take apart are, one is an issue of safeguarding. You can all, in any institution, you can get the bad guy or the bad woman. Is how you then deal with them. So that's an aspect of safeguarding, which I don't know whether it's worth talking about that. I mean, people can just Google it, right? Understand what safeguarding is.
Well, it relates to what you said earlier in relation to Mike Pilavachi. Yeah. That we mustn't see the abuse as being just about that individual. Abuse is allowed to happen in cultures that allow abuse to happen.
Absolutely.
In which there is no scrutiny of leadership,
and
in
it can
which
be
there's no
replicated.
accountability of leadership.
It can be replicated. That person can grow in their confidence or their appetite, whatever, and they're not challenged.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect. Then the other aspect, which a friend of mine who's a rabbi said, what he's absolutely bamboozled by is the covering up of that failure in safeguarding.
Yes.
And so we've got a double whammy of the person that is the abuser isn't called to account. They can just crack on with it, whatever they want. They can even be given a better job, more pay, better house, moved on with their career. But then also, once that people are told and informed this person is abusive, and I mean, I really like just being really pragmatic about it, un-Christ-like. I mean, all of us are aspiring to be Christ-like, but that's just categorically not anything of a leader. You know, it just doesn't, or a priest, or any of the other language, you know, that we want to see things. It's just so counter that. So there's an issue of that. But then when you hear about it and think, you know, but they're a good egg. I have nice lunches with them. They like the same red wine that I do. I mean, what's this culture? What's this? The more I've been looking at it, and the chip on my shoulder, a friend of mine went to, and I don't remember, did you go to a comp in Northern Ireland, or did you go to a private school?
When I was at school in Northern Ireland, we had a complete grammar school system.
Okay, so grammar school.
I didn't go to a private school.
But you did your 11 plus?
In my area, it was actually a 14 plus. But
okay.
Yeah.
It was bright enough to get into the good school.
Yeah.
Well, I went to a rubbish school, and I mean, it was good, it was great, but it wasn't fee paying. My friend went to a very good private school, and he says, I've got a serious chip on my shoulder.
Right.
Part of that is maybe why I was asked to resign from St Paul's Hammersmith. But what it has given me is a bit of a nose. My middle class, I don't know which level of, Romford middle class anyway, can sniff out this elitist thing. So when you're talking about the hierarchy, I think it's also an aspect of class, or it's an aspect of kind of elite boys club, or whatever it is. Yeah. So when you're saying you're seeking change, there's a multifaceted thing to why you would cover up something like that.
Yes.
And I don't think we're talking about the nuance. So I'd love just to spend a mo talking about the nuance of what is it that leads to just covering up this sort of stuff in a church.
Okay. So I think if we go back to your rabbi situation, of course, Judaism in our society is constructed in a different way from the Church of England. So you have very many different types of Judaism.
Yep.
Each church is essentially congregational, or they may be part of a network. They may be part of liberal, reform,
Orthodox.
Yeah. That's very different from the Church of England, and it's very different from the way, I think, under Justin Welby, the Church of England brand has developed. We see ourselves as this is the Church of England. So if abuse happens within a Jewish context, it's happening within that congregation and within that synagogue, rather than within Judaism in general, I think. So I think one of the reasons why a lot of cover-up happens in the Church of England is because of this overarching brand. Partly also, I think, because we are the established church, and the position of the establishment and the privileges that it gives us are part of that cover-up. I find it interesting that you raise the issue of class, and certainly I think class is a dimension. I would say that the most classist context in which I have ever been is General Synod of the Church of England. I think, it actually reeks of class and division at some level. However, I don't think class is necessarily the significant thing in terms of cover-up. I think that there are bishops who didn't go to independent school. There are bishops who are not just the old white
Eton.
boy Eton network. That's quite clear, and I think with increasing numbers of
cultural
women. Yeah, precisely. But there is an internal culture within the church which has its own sort of class, in inverted commas, which is different from class in society in general. So what do you have in terms of the church? And it's one of the reasons why lots of clergy are afraid to speak out about their own experiences, is that bishops have a lot of power and influence and authority. And bishops, for example, are in... any preferment within the church is really a gift in their hands. So if you want to be an area dean within a deanery, that's going to be a gift of the bishop. If you're going to be an archdeacon, if you're going to be a suffragan or an assistant or an area bishop in a diocese, that's at the gift of the bishop. So what you have, I think, is a desperately sycophantic culture.
Yeah.
Because, and I'll just put this at its very base, if you want a career, if you want preferment, you have to arslick.
Right.
And you do not criticise, and you do not raise questions. That culture is really difficult. That culture, I think, has been magnified over the last number of years because we now have what's called the learning development communities. And within these, bishops nominate people within their diocese to do essentially mini MBAs, which are run from Church House in conjunction with various universities. Bishops nominate people at a very early stage of their ministry and indicate that these are people who are going to go into senior posts within the church, to be the future archdeacons, to be the future bishops, to be the future deans of cathedrals.
Right.
Now, that type of culture, it seems to me, is extraordinarily problematic.
Right.
Because it means that you are setting and deepening a culture in which questions are not allowed to be raised, and in which the senior leadership perpetuate the senior leadership.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, is that what you...
No, so my mind went straight back to my experience in Holy Trinity Brompton plant in Hammersmith.
Yeah.
And that very similar hierarchical spiritual authority.
Yeah.
Using that as some sort of reinforcement of a position.
Yes,
rather than just serving people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's but seriously.
Yeah.
Jesus was known as meek. He washed feet.
Yeah.
He served. He stood, waited, and listened to stories of people that would never speak to Jews or whatever.
Yeah.
People didn't. You just don't get that sense of Christ at all.
I'm totally with you on that. And I think there are other aspects to that which go back to our discussion about Helen Ann Hartley and different episcopal culture in New Zealand.
Yeah.
If you have bishops which are closer to their clergy, who actually, are really the main pastoral carers for their clergy, that leads to a very different relationship with your bishop. What we have in the Church of England is people who become bishops within particular frameworks. So you'll become an area dean. That may be a full-time area dean, so you may not even have parish responsibilities anymore.
Yeah.
Or you become an archdeacon, or you become a dean of a cathedral. So the distance that you are from ordinary people in the pew and ordinary pastoral work becomes increasing.
Yeah.
And then the emphasis that we've had on leadership, which has been really big in Justin Welby's time, rather than bishops as pastors, is deeply, deeply problematic.
And that's what you've seen. So leadership comes from what the business think.
Yes.
It doesn't come from,
but as we know,
Bible think.
Yeah, exactly. Because leadership, in terms of, we are called to be Christ. So we are called as priests, as bishops, as deacons, as the people of God, to grow into the stature of what Jesus Christ is. Now, Jesus,
and as we've spoken about before, to see the individual flourish.
To see the individual flourish.
And which
Christ.
I love, for me, when people say, well, what's the point of Christianity and all that sort of stuff? It's that.
Yeah.
It's that.
Yeah. And so what you have is this increasing sense of leadership, which takes away from the sense of a bishop as a pastor.
Yeah.
But also bishop as, obviously the word bishop comes from episcope, which is about vision. Mm-hmm. You set the vision. The vision of the church is the vision which Jesus embodies in his life, death, and resurrection. It is the vision of the values of the reign of God in which the poor are raised up.
Yeah.
That's the vision of the heart of the gospel. Now, this relates also, I think, into how we deal with other people in society as well. obviously, if we look at the scriptures and the representation of Jesus in certainly the first three Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus is really interested in people who are not religious, not Jewish. He's simply
who ostracized or isolated.
Precisely that. And I think we have become too much orientated on wanting people to be like us, rather than entering into dialogue with them. And the entering into dialogue is significant in terms, I would say, of your experience in somewhere like St. Paul's Hammersmith. I did a leadership course which was run by the present Bishop of Nottingham and Southwell, Paul Williams, when he was Bishop of Kensington. Yeah. And at one point he was talking about us as leaders, setting the vision as clergy. He made a diagram in which the vision was at the center, and that was you, and you were setting the vision. Then there were people who shared the vision, and these were really important. Then there were people who quarter shared the vision, half shared the vision. And sort of after you got to only half sharing the vision, you had to get rid of these people. Yeah. Now, that's fascinating to me, because it feels to me totally alien to the depiction of Christ in the Gospels. Christ is very much about being really interested in people being part of a community in which the vision is expanded by those you come into dialogue with. Yeah. So, and the interesting thing about
their transformation. Yeah. That's the interesting thing. That the vision moves in the way that they flourish, and then in that we see God in Christ.
And it's also about us being transformed by the other as well. Right. So I think we've got into a real conception, a dominant conception with the entire Church of England, which is that this is, we sort of own Jesus as a brand and a product, and we're offering it and selling it to you. Yeah. Whereas actually, I live in a parish which is over 50% Muslim. We've got over 50% Muslim children in our school, that I see God in them already, and that I have something to learn from them is really important to me, because it's fundamental to any conception of God as creator. Yeah. God creates everyone in God's own image.
And you've also demonstrated that with the art piece that you had commissioned, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, we could get a shot of it afterwards, but explain I suppose theology as to why.
So the theology so during COVID, I was very conscious about the ways in which COVID was experienced by people in our community in different ways in relation to their gender or their race or their socioeconomic status. And we are just about a black majority church. And we have a lot of younger women of African origin. They mostly work in healthcare, in social care, and in retail, and also have children. So their experience of COVID was very different, certainly from mine.
Definitely to mine.
Definitely to those amongst us of whatever race who were able to sort of work from home or were furloughed. So I that's why I wanted a statue commissioned of Jesus and Mary of African origin. Yeah. Because it draws attention to the ways in which our experiences of anything, our experience of COVID, are very particular in relation to those parts of ourselves. It also reminds us that our experience of God, I think, is very particular in relation to those aspects of our own identities as well.
Yeah. So I've kind of got to a point in our conversation which has been really, I didn't expect it to go here. I just wanted to rant about how useless church authority was. Actually, what I feel like, and I'm coming out of this, is with understanding that I went into church ministry, whatever size that M was, with a real optimism that the church could provide a platform or a base in which to behave like Christ in the way I could try and figure it out to people in a local community. What our conversation has led me to kind of get to a point, and is the church is operating a business. I don't know who the shareholders are. The church is operating a business. I don't really know who gets a kick out of being, what I left church in a lot of ways, working in churches. Yes, I was asked to resign, but a lot of my reasoning and I got to that point was I was thinking, I could put my time into something and actually make money.
Yeah.
And actually all I'm doing here is running some kind of business for other people.
Right.
It really felt like that in the sort of evangelical Church of England culture. As a youth worker, I was just, it became really tiring. I felt like I was just going through that kind of cyclical experience of, I'm doing this again.
Yeah.
There's so many
Does that feel frustrating in the sense that, what I'm hearing from you is that you had no way of sort of feeding into sort of how your experience of ministry could actually change that culture? Or
I think I was still quite young, so I was very much a sponge for a lot of the time I was working in church. But being told, let's look at this purpose-driven bullshit from this American author that has since sort of not a church leader anymore because he had a bunch of affairs or whatever. Very purpose-driven. I just sort of get a sense that, we're talking about, I've got to a point with you where I'm talking and understanding that there's a culture that isn't about service. There's a culture that isn't about Christ. And there's a culture that isn't about serving people. Instead, it allows abuse, it covers up abuse, and it supports the club.
I think in some sense that's right. I think, and I think it's something that all of us have to be aware of. I think those of us who feel called to ministry.
Do you still feel called? Because you're doing an incredible job of speaking on behalf of people, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for speaking on behalf of the soul survivor people. Thank you for challenging the way that it was just, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. But do you still feel called into? This building's beautiful, and I can sense how whatever this needs. It's such a weird way of saying it, but I can certainly feel a wholeness here. I'm not throwing the whole thing out and saying, all of this should just burn with that club.
Yeah.
Or if it's a business, then they need to go broke. I don't see it. But how are you reconciling between that and this? or even better, because I don't want to reduce it to the building. And the woman from whichever African country that you can visualize straight away when you had that made.
Yeah. So I think that all of us, I'll come back to that part of the question, but if I start with my own vocation first, I think that all of us need to be really, really aware of all of those who are in a position like mine need to be really aware of the different dynamics of vocation. We very readily talk about God has called me, but actually, the ways in which God calls us is embodied, and it's within sort of your own experience of how you're brought up, church, all of that. I think a lot of people who are called into ministry, and I would put myself into this category, were called into sort of, there's an innate desire to want to be up front, to lead stuff. There's an innate narcissism in that. You are in a position in which you have a lot of authority over people automatically, and that can be exploited. And I think that, my own experience of church in general has been really, really positive. My own experience of different communities, my own experience of different parishes, chaplaincy at university. I've not been abused myself or feel that I've been abused within a church context. I think I have experienced some homophobia within a church context, but I don't think that has been of a significant enough level for me to feel that I don't want to be a priest. My increasing experience and of listening to victims and survivors, though, does really, I'll be really honest, at various points recently, it has made me really question why I represent the institution. Why do I continue to be a Church of England clergyman when these things have happened and actually continue to happen and are not being addressed? And I can only say that that's because on balance at the moment, and that is a balance, the sense of being called to be a priest, to love as Jesus loves, to build up communities in which there is justice and there is peace, that just outweighs that at the moment. But I know a lot of colleagues. I've had some colleagues who've left because of the safeguarding issues, the issues around homophobia, the issues around racism as well. And I think for all of us, it's a balance, and at some point in some people's lives that tips more one way than the other.
Yeah.
I haven't felt it tip for me. Maybe that's because, I am vocal, and I am, maybe in Stephen Cottrell's terms, a bit shouty about the issues that I care passionately about and the people who I've come into pastoral experience with. But and that I think some people would therefore maybe label me as angry. I know one bishop, after my speech at General Synod calling for Justin Welby and William Nye to resign, called my speech abusive. But the reality for me is that a lot of colleagues internalize that anger rather than express it, and internalized anger always leads to depression. Now, I think when you come into a depressive state, that's the bit where the balance maybe tips, and then you decide to leave. I haven't decided to leave yet.
Good.
And the nice thing is, and this is the reaction that happened when I started the petition on change.org for Justin to go. I was inundated with messages from victims and survivors who had not contacted me previously to say thank you. I think for lots of them, they feel that they've been in a place that's really, really a bit stuck.
Yeah.
And no change happens. They get words, but no action. And I think for those who contacted me, it felt that I was forcing a change. And obviously, that one resignation isn't enough.
No.
So. And I think, I think in the minds of some other people who've contacted me as well, it feels as if some people might judge it as me coming to a really, really political action really quickly. It's not a decision that I made lightly to do. I hear the criticisms about it, and the big criticism. I mean, not the criticism about scapegoating and lynch mobbing, I just think are fantastical and not real criticisms. The criticisms about, do any of our lives, hold up to the scrutiny that might be given? Well, no. I mean, in terms of Christian doctrine, all of us are sinful and fall short of God's glory, and it's only in Christ's life, death, and resurrection that we are reconciled to God, and I am completely aware of that. But I think there is a real difference between the individual ways in which I or you or any of us may act in our lives, which are of a level in which we may need reconciliation with another human being, and the ways in which consistently, time after time, issues about abuse and safeguarding are brought to bishops and they're covered up and lied about.
So to kind of wrap up, what's this year going to look like? As in, so what's the date? The 11th or something today? 10th,
10th. This is the 10th.
Yeah.
Minutes in the car.
Okay.
3 minutes in the car.
Oh,
we're ending up.
Let's finish it up in 3 minutes. Where do we go from here? Because it's not. It doesn't make me feel very buoyant.
It doesn't make you feel very buoyant. Well, you also you have to live in hope. Obviously, this is going to be a really significant year with a new Archbishop of Canterbury being chosen. I really hope whoever is chosen will operate a more pastoral ministry in relation to the Church of England, in relation to abuse survivors, in relation to those of us who serve as clergy, and that actually the reforms of the culture that are required are seen to be urgent and need to take place and are implemented, not just at the central level in Church House, but within each diocese. I think that's the hope that I have.
And will that make that much difference? That's the question. So, bam, we get someone, new CEO of the Church of England. They're a great leader. Okay, that would be bad.
I think the reality is that because Justin has had to resign, the new Archbishop of Canterbury knows that they really do need to address this issue with urgency. That, I think, is what has changed significantly because of Justin's resignation. That this should be the top priority as a new Archbishop.
Right.
Not flying off around the Anglican Communion on, holidays or whatever you might call it. It is actually about addressing the real pastoral issues within the Church in England.
Which is the unaddressed. Unaddressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And how are you going to hold people to account for that personally? Well,
I'll continue on General Synod, and I hope that I have a small voice within General Synod. I hope that voice is one which is able to win other people to the arguments that I make. But I'm also obviously open to listening to how that change happens.
Great. Thank you.
Whee!
Yeah, no, yeah, good. Cut there, thank you.